Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Freedom Over Fascism Fireside Chats. Today, we're going to be having a conversation unlike any of the ones we usually have. We are going to be having our fireside chat with Dmitri Melhorn. He's a former political advisor, and he was on this podcast 2 years ago, May of 2024, talking about how to fund and win the 2024 elections. And um, sadly, we all know how that went. But today, we're going to talk about something that he's doing, wargaming the future. Hey, friends, it's Stephanie. I'd like to talk to you about two of the sexiest things around: washing dishes and doing laundry. So I heard about drops, these dishwashing and laundry pods, almost a decade ago. They promised to be dye and scent free. So I ordered them, and guess what? They work really well at cleaning clothes and washing dishes. They don't irritate my skin or give me migraines with artificial fragrances. Did I mention they work? And they don't come in plastic containers. They come in cardboard boxes that recycle and break down quickly. Drops pods have prevented more than 9 million plastic bottles from entering the waste stream. They're vegan, they're cruelty-free, they're free of phthalates, sulfates, and parabens. Drops is also a certified B Corp, which I just learned about, which is a community of businesses that meet verified social, environmental, and governance standards. And did I mention they work really well? With that said, Drops will give you 25% off if you use the discount code FREEDOM, and you'll get free shipping on first-time purchases. It's DROPPS.com with the code FREEDOM. I'll be talking about this and a few other brands on Freedom Over Fascism, but only things I use myself that I can really vouch for and that share my values. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to Freedom Over Fascism. If you can afford a paid subscription, please choose that. And if you can't, please like, share, and get the word out. And now back to our conversation. Welcome back to Freedom Over Fascism.
It's nice to have freedom over fascism, at least on a podcast.
Right? I mean, we got to have it somewhere. So I read a couple weeks ago in The Atlantic that you were doing some wargaming. And one of the things that's going on at this point of time, at this moment, is I'm trying to help people understand the context of where we are and talk about where we're going. And one of the things that frustrates me most of all is that out of federally elected people, I'm not seeing a plan, I'm not seeing a backbone aside from a few. And I worry that there is nobody thinking this through, although you are, and I know a number of other people are. So, can you talk a little bit about what you're up to and how that's been going?
Sure. And I'll just say, I'm not sure that lack of backbone is really the problem. I think the problem is the lack of plan. No one really has a plan to address this moment. And in part, it's because all of us grew up over the course of our lives and our parents' lives in a different historical moment than the one we're in now. And so, what I'm doing now with my colleagues at the Atoll Society, we're developing fictional scenarios to make it easier for people, including decision makers, to inhabit the possible future that we might be entering so that we can shape it a little bit more intentionally. So, what that means in practice for the salons that you read about is that we have created some fictional archetypes. They borrow from a book that was written 90 years ago called It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. And it allows the basic themes from that novel. There was a nationalist team, and there was a institutionalist, constitutionalist team, and there was a capitalist team. So you might think of them as red, blue, and green using sort of modern American terminology. And you take those red, blue, and green teams and you let them play through a moment that looks and feels a lot like a very destabilized and authoritarian leaning version of America. And the ideal is that playing the game allows people to explore the reality a little bit more critically and with more awareness of the broader historical scope rather than some of the narrow specifics.
it seems to me that maybe it allows people also to think more outside of the box of real live politics and what seems to be possible when. So, can you like go into a little bit more in detail about how this is working out and what are people coming up with?
Ah, so the gaming salons are, well, I'll just give you a little bit more detail. So in the book, it was written in 1935. 1935, it was a year that was, a lot of things happened. For example, it was in 1935 that Adolf Hitler formally withdrew from the Treaty of Versailles that had ended World
Mhm.
War One, and
Right.
he did so largely with British permission, British appeasement under Neville Chamberlain. So 1935 was when Germany formally rearmed by launching the Wehrmacht
Mhm.
and the Luftwaffe and the German Navy that had the U-boats. I mean, they launched this massive military. It was launched in 1935. That year was also the year that the Nuremberg laws were passed that made it effectively illegal to marry a Jew or do business with a Jew and strip Jews of their citizenship. That was also the year that Adolf Hitler and the German Nazi government adopted the swastika as their flag. That was also the year when American radio broadcaster, the radio priest, Father Coughlin, reached millions and millions with a platform of violence and socialism, wealth redistribution, but around race and class and ethnicity. He was very hostile to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, very much an ally of the Louisiana Kingfisher, Huey Long. So that's the historical background. And your readers tend to be the readers who remember that moment a little bit, or at least have read about it. And so what the game says is let's assume all those characters were fast forwarded into today, 2026. So the fascist character from the past, from this book, in the book, it can't happen here in 1935. This really horrible person named Buzz Windrip becomes president and tries to take over the country in a fascist way. The institutionalists, very boring, they're led by some, Midwestern, Northeastern senator type named Walt Trowbridge. And then the capitalists are led by a guy named Francis Hasbro, but you could just imagine any capitalist, Davos type. And so you have these three characters, and in the salon, you imagine they're not in 1935, but they're in 2026. And you're on one of those three teams. And if you're on the nationalist team, you want to keep power. If you're on the sort of institutionalist team, you want to restore the idea of America as an idea. And if you're on the capitalist team, you want to make money.
Right.
And so you just
So
play these
it's
moves.
not
So
so
yeah,
different now between, the Trump regime and the Epstein class, say, or the billionaires and the institutional Democrats who are attempting to
it is eerily familiar.
right. Yeah.
It is eerily familiar. So Buzz Windrip in the book was written in 1935, so you gotta bring it up to the modern era. So in the modern era, Buzz Windrip, won the presidency, shocked everyone in 2016, barely lost a re-election in 2020, tried violently to keep power in 2021, failed, but won re-election against a boring incumbent or a threatening incumbent, in 2024. And in 2025 started consolidating power. So as you enter the game in 2026, President Buzz Windrip has masked federal agents shooting American citizens on the streets of a northern town in the country.
Mhm.
And so you got to see how to react if you're the fascist, if you're the institutionalist. And you'd said earlier, Stephanie, about how important it is to get out of the moment and what feels like the box of the moment. And most people, when they're going about their businesses, whatever their businesses are, they got to think about that afternoon, the next week, maybe the next year. And this game asks a question, well, what about if you thought a little further than that? So the teams get together and they submit moves. So the institutionalist team, maybe they spend some money on trying to win the midterms or filing some lawsuits. The nationalist team, maybe they ramp up their rhetoric. The capitalist team, maybe they hedge their bets. They submit their moves. It's very easy to submit moves. You get together, six of your friends, you debate for a little bit, you submit some moves. Wide open. It's very much a wide open universe. And then this game software that is built using historical artifacts for how human societies actually make these kinds of transitions takes all of those inputs, adjusts some probabilities, effectively rolls some dice, sees how they interact, and then the next thing the players all perceive and hear, and it's only 10 minutes of real time. But the players then say, you made a move in March of 2026. It's now May of 2027. Here's how those moves played out. Here's who controls the speaker's gavel. Here's what's going on in the States. Now, what are your moves? And again, you got to make your moves. And then you make the moves, and then the game adjusts them and say, got it. Okay, those were your moves from May of 2027. Now it's November 2028. It's a contested presidential election. People are squabbling. What are your moves now? Got to submit the moves. Big scuffle there. And then you submit the moves, and the game engine says, great, it's now no longer November 2028. It is now December 2030. Here's what America looks like. Here's who won. Here's who lost. And that's the game.
And so they're separate games in different small groups of people. So it's essentially the same experiment being replicated over and over with just different players perhaps making different moves.
Precisely.
Okay. So
Nailed it precisely.
I am so curious about that because, in the world I live in, we have a pretty big community here on Substack. We've got people who are trying to think outside the box, but don't have any real institutional power. Some people have a theory of change, other people don't. Uh, we're essentially, aside from what we can do by influencing any one of those groups, don't have institutional power of our own. So we talk a lot about what we think the Democrats in national power should do, or at state level power should be doing, or what are what moves the capitalist class to change its behavior? What can keep fascist regime from, people have been asking since whatever, 2016, what is the bottom? And I don't think we've even close to reached the bottom, but they were like, "Oh, he's talking about abortion and putting it, like, out there as something to go take away. This must be the bottom." I was like, "No, no, 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 no. We
Yes.
know where the bottom is. We've been to the bottom. Let's, like, open up our
Right.
mind."
As a species, things get a lot worse than where one of the things I often say to people when they're gnashing their teeth or rending their garments over how bad things are at any given moment, say now, February 2026, there's a lot that's bad. What I try to reassure people is that 2, 3 years from now, they will look back on February 2026 and wish it could be that good again.
Yeah. Well, I think those of us who are watching can see it and see a trajectory and mostly fear that there's no good trajectory here. I'm curious, and I think most of the people in the chat here are kind of in the, we see that this is not going well. So I'm curious about what the different scenarios have ended up being.
Yeah.
How have individual groups gone? Have there been any ideas that are innovative beyond what anybody of today has done, or is it kind of predictable?
Well, I mean, I found all the specifics quite fascinating. Different teams have come up with some very creative and clever moves. And I'm happy to go into that if you'd like. We certainly have the time to do so on this podcast. But it seems you're also asking maybe a more fundamental question and like, what can we be hopeful about? What can we do? And so, how often do the institutionalists win and why and how,
Yeah.
basically, right? And there are a lot of versions and variants, but there is a straight shot to victory for the institutionalists, and it is a peaceful transfer of power in January 2029.
Right.
That's
But
the
what are the odds of that? I mean,
well, as of right now, the betting markets give Republicans about a 40% chance of winning that election fairly in 2028. So start there.
Okay.
By the end of 2028, there's about a 40% chance it's already over because the Democrats just lost to whomever, whether it's Trump running again or Vance or whatever. They just lost using the old rules because their candidate wasn't good enough, their narrative was whatever the things that they failed to do in the past, they failed to do enough of, and they just lose. So now we put that aside. If that happens, it's over. But now let's go into the world where using the old rules in November of 2028, civil society and international society declares, oh, the Democrat won because the Electoral College, a majority of the Electoral College electors are in states that the Democrats won. Therefore,
You to
yeah,
go back a little
yes,
bit, when
please.
you say it's
Yeah,
all over, what do you mean?
I mean that, yeah, that's worth unpacking. I believe that the kind of consolidation that has been underway since the MAGA movement initially took office in 2017 is a ratchet, a one-way ratchet that just gets worse and worse.
Right.
It is one of the reasons why I and others worked, really put all of our efforts, all of our chips on the table to try to prevent a second term, because 4 more years of that ratchet is very intense. Like, we're already at the end of year 1 of the second term. We do have mass federal agents disappearing US citizens without
Mhm.
accountability. Kind of extraordinary that that would be happening on at the end of the first year of the second term. So
I
if
mean,
you
it's really
imagine
quick that
not just 3. Yeah,
they had 4
what's that?
years to think about it and
Precisely.
and
So yeah.
their plan in place.
Oh, yeah. So, but people who are like, "It's all gonna be okay," I'm like, is just entering the second out of 4 years of the second term, and that is already where the ratchet is, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of things that the salons also reveal that are just baked in, like, ICE will be one of the 12 largest militaries in world history, and will have roughly run out of targets by late 2027.
You say
What are
run
they
out
gonna
of
do?
targets, run out of, like,
They will have
feasibly ground?
disappeared everybody that looks even close to being like they might have been there for some immigration-related reason. All of those people, they will have met all of Stephen Miller's quotas.
Right, or
No.
come up with new quotas? I mean, with
Yes, he will, but he won't be you just can't keep a group that large, that active for that long by just trying to add more foreign-born. You're
Mhm,
gonna have to pick fights with liberals in the cities. And they know how to do that. They know
mhm.
how to get, angry young men in urban enclaves to engage in acts of violence that they film and then they escalate. Anyway, there's many, many. So all of that is before 2028.
Mhm.
I'm just saying if that movement continues to have another unbroken string of power after January of 2029, I mean, I already the United States has left most indicators of the top tier of transparency, corruption, democracy, rule of law. This country, the United States, no longer leads those lists. It has been falling sharply. It will fall a lot more sharply over the next 3 years. What I'm just saying is, if MAGA wins re-election, that's it. Like those ratchets don't go backwards.
No, but is it that we kind of balkanize and the blue states and red
Best
states
case.
best
Well,
case?
let me actually play it out to well, let me actually play out a slightly different scenario, which I
Mhm.
think is also quite likely. Let's say that civil society declares that the Democratic candidate has won. And let's say it's decisive, like 2 to 3 points, like it's clear. 2 to 3 points nationally and sweeps all of the famous 7 swing states. Okay. Uh, that vote will be highly segregated by population density. It comes from the cities. It just does. It has for decades. The cities, depending on how you measure population density, the cities are roughly 3 to 1 Democrat. It's the inverse in rural areas, suburbs are in the middle. If you get lower turnout in the cities, or if for some reason the city vote isn't counted, they're bright red states. All of them,
Right.
everyone.
Right, but
Through
so yeah, okay. I
it's
think we
midway,
all
but
know
even
how
if you
that
even
works.
if yeah, even if you address for that, even if you solve for all of that, what happens in November 2028 when international civil society says, congratulations, Democratic nominee fill in the bank. We can say Gavin Newsom because he's leading in a lot of the betting markets right now. Gavin Newsom has won against, say, JD Vance. That's what people. Okay. Um, who decides that Gavin Newsom has won? Who makes that call? It's not international civil society. It's not the press, right? The
Well, the
electoral
ones in
college.
power are the ones that can stop it.
It's the
If
yeah, it's the electoral college that decides, right?
one
Well,
thinks that they
well,
might be
the thing is that the MAGA establishment has spent decades explaining why city votes cannot be trusted. Whether it's Rudy Giuliani defaming election workers with photos that allege falsehoods about their behavior, this is the Ruby Freeman thing, or whether it's Wisconsin and North Carolina Republicans going way, way back, the way they justified their severe gerrymandering and lame duck power grabs was by explaining that the city, that if you just take out the cities, the Republicans had won. Why would you just take out the cities? Well, look at them. They're different than us. And that's why you have all those big maps that started in 2004, where it was as if geography, the redness of the rural areas, if you just squint hard enough, the blue dots disappear. So the cities are not like us. They're not Americans. They're not to be trusted, whatever. And then in 2020, we had the full trial run through to January 1st, 2021, January 6th, 2021, the full trial run where everybody on their side tried to say you can't count the cities. It's why they tried not to count Detroit. So that came down to a series of rural state legislators submitting alternate states of electors that simply counted the state as if the city was fraudulent. If you count the state as if the city's fraudulent, it's a red state. Michigan without Detroit, Pennsylvania without Philly, right? They're red, red, red states if you take out those cities. And you have all these rural state legislators who have an enormous amount of power under the US Constitution submitting slates of electors saying that I don't trust the cities. And so you have two slates of electors, one from electors who do trust the cities, saying that Gavin Newsom has won, and one from slates of electors that don't trust the cities, saying that JD Vance has won. With me so far, this is just basic what's happening in January 2021. This is the most likely scenario according to all the betting markets, right? Okay. Well, who's the president of the Senate? Who decides? JD
last time
Vance.
it yeah, last time it came
Vance.
down to one person's
Nope. Right. It was Mike Pence last time, but this time it's not Mike Pence. This time it's JD Vance. And JD Vance is on the record saying that he would do what Mike Pence didn't do, which is accept those alternate slates of electors. We know exactly how the right-wing media will characterize the urban vote. We know exactly how Fox News will characterize it. We know exactly how ICE and the militias will characterize it. We know exactly how the people who were pardoned for the felonies of which they were convicted on January 6, 2021, all of those people who were pardoned, we know how they'll react. And many of them now have positions of influence within hard power agencies of the United States government, state, Homeland Security, IRS. So we also know that all of the military forces in the United States take orders from the Constitution, but what the Constitution means is determined by the lawyers. All of the lawyers at the Department of State, at the Department of Justice, at the Department of Defense have been purged for loyalty oaths. Okay, so mid-November 2028, Gavin Newsom has won by 2 or 3 points. Everybody's relieved. Then what happens? Well, go fast forward to January. You have one reality that says JD Vance won and one reality that says Gavin Newsom won. The question for the salons and for really everybody is, under what circumstances would JD Vance and those people hand power to Gavin Newsom historically? And it's quite rare.
right.
It's very, very, very unlikely that a peaceful transfer of power will be enforced. They have all the guns. They have all the rationales. If they keep power, then none of their crimes will ever be prosecuted. They will be able to continue to just enrich themselves off the public good. They and their families will be rich and powerful forever. Whereas if they turn over power to a rule of law regime, they might go to jail for things they've already done. And by the way, if they do anything criminal in the future, they will go to jail. And they won't be able to just keep using their power to just steal from America. So that's their choice. So why would they give power to Gavin Newsom?
Well,
Because the press said he won?
no, 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 no.
Because
I
the
don't think
urban
that
libs said he won?
so what is the is there any leverage? In the chat, they're saying, "Are we doomed?" Well, is there any leverage that can be applied to force them to accept an outcome that they don't want?
So all of the mechanics of all of the Atoll Society's fiction, including the gaming salons, is based on historical examples that we can read about, learn from, including archaeology. So you can go back further than written history, but you need an example. And so the question is when you have that much concentrated physical power, the full power of the United States executive branch in the hands of a kleptocratic fascist crew, what can everybody else do to get them to let go? One thing you can do is actually win the election in November 2028. That's important. Even that's not a gimme. It's only 60-40 we do that. But then January 2029, there needs to be a handoff of power. And what can civil society do to demand a handoff? And this is where the historical archetypes that inform that set of scenarios become very important. I'm going to list a few for your listeners, but I'm going to focus on one in particular that's particularly relevant to the United States. Okay, the Velvet Revolution in 1989, when Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia stood up to the Soviet Empire. In 1988, the people of Chile marched in protest and threw out a plea from the corrupt dictator Pinochet to try to stay for an illegal third term. 1988, 1989. In 1986, there was a mass uprising in the Philippines called the People's Revolution that succeeded because the military refused to fire on their own civilians, ousting the corrupt dictators. Right. In
Mhm.
2023, Bibi Netanyahu tried to push a reform that would take power away from the Israeli Supreme Court and give it to him and the Knesset to decide what was reasonable. And Israeli civil society rose up together and stopped him. Those examples are relevant, but the most relevant example is the year 2000. It was in Serbia, a nation that only existed because Yugoslavia had been ripped apart by these demons, the worst form of the atrocities. And the president of this nation was a serious fascist, Slobodan Milosevic, one of the worst. So you have a nation that was formed out of this with all of the executive agencies led by a man who was in power. And he had allies in Russia, which was still quite powerful, although not what it is now or right before. It's a moment of weakness for Russia. But he had all the power. And he thought that he would let the election run because he thought he was going to be able to intimidate people into voting for him. He lost the election. Exact parallel to what we just hypothesized for 2028 USA.
Mhm.
He lost the election according to civil society and international observers, but he and his media allies and his government agencies said he didn't lose, that it was too close to call. So they wanted to rerun. A student group named Otpor, OTPOR exclamation point, which is, I believe, Serbian for struggle. A student group flooded the streets with bulldozers and basically forced a general strike where everything shut down until Slobodan Milosevic left office like he should have because he lost. This movement, the Serbian youth movement of 2000, worked. You need that kind of arm in arm collective action by everybody else, all of capital, all of the gun owners, all of the liberal professors. Everybody needs to link arms and say, we may disagree on everything else, but if someone loses an election, they cannot stay in power or everything else is broken. And if you link arms that forcefully, you can make a difference. And if you start preparing now, years in advance for that moment, recognizing that is the critical moment, there are a lot of things that people talk about that are not relevant, in my view, to that moment. Most of the things people talk about, Democrats and otherwise, are not that moment. The plan is how do you get a peaceful transfer of power? How do you win in 28? And then how do you enforce it in 29? That's it. That's what everybody should be focused on. And while it's not illegal to talk about it, we should be talking about it. How do you link arms with people you don't already know? How do you make sure you're linking arms in a way that is de escalatory? Don't march, sit. Don't sit, lie, but lie together in a way that shuts everything down until the rules are followed. If people start planning that way now, there is a chance to replicate those kinds of civil society movements from overseas. But that is the only path out for the
Okay.
institutionalists.
But the United States is far larger than any of the other examples that exist and more distributed.
It is big.
So, yeah, I mean,
If
like
you wanna look
Serbia's
at similar size, you'd look at 1947 India, but it's not quite the same for other reasons. But there are other examples of that kind of scale, but it's a very, very close and dangerous situation.
right. So,
Because the other thing, Stephanie, is when you get to a point where if the Democrat wins, let's say it's Gavin Newsom wins, right? And JD Vance loses, let's just say. There are four branching scenarios. One is JD Vance just obeys the rules.
yeah, right.
Okay, that's one. Two is there's a general strike that works, like India 1947, like Serbia 2000. Three is there a general strike that doesn't work? That's Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
And then four is there's a general strike that starts to work and then everybody starts fighting. And that's what happened to most of the Arab world, especially Syria, after the Arab
Yes.
Spring. So when we get to a place where we need a general strike to enforce peaceful elections, we already have a bunch of branching outcomes that are very dangerous, including failure.
Okay. That's cheerful. So, okay. Scenario one, JD Vance wins or whatever. JD Vance is never giving up power unless, as you're saying, there's a general strike that works, but that every other group has to buy into, right? So the capitalists would have to be on the side of the strikers and the militaries would have to be on the side of the strikers.
Yeah. So back to the gaming salons, one of the things that happens is when the institute, so there's the way it works is the teams, so the nationalist and institutionalist win conditions are mutually exclusive.
Right.
The nationalists have to steal so much money and get away with it that the institutionalists have to not be able to let that happen.
Mhm.
You know,
Right. That's
and so
now.
you can't have three. Yeah, you can't have three winners. You can't have two winners, one winner, or zero winners. In the scenario where the institutionalists and the capitalists both win, and that has happened, actually, that's quite common in these scenarios. And maybe there's something about this group getting together and being thoughtful. But what happens in the last move in November, when there's a contested election, if it's clear that the Democrat or the institutionalist won, capital tends to surge towards the Democrat because they understand that if the election is not respected, neither are their property rights.
Right. And also if
The-
there's no stability, they can't manage their risk and make
One of
money.
the things that's important in the earlier moves, 2026, 2027, is that you're not so flagrantly, you meaning the institutionalists, are not so flagrantly anti capitalist that they either leave the country, move their assets overseas, or just side with the nationalists as less bad, right? Um, but as long as you don't do those things, as long as the institutionalist coalition includes enough money and enough guns, then it can win that general strike. Because at the end of the day, bullies don't like to, you know, like if there's a massive seizure, and also it depends on what the margin is, right? If Gavin Newsom wins by 5, it's very, very hard to resist the strike pressure, right? If Gavin Newsom wins by 1, it's very, very hard for the strike to succeed, you know?
Mhm.
And then, of course, there's what if Vance just wins, in which case, well, we already know who's going to be in charge at the federal level.
Yeah, Peter Thiel. So,
But in the game, there is no JD Vance or Peter Thiel. The game has fictional characters, including Gustav Krupp, Fritz Tyson. The vice president to Buzz Windrop is Gustav Krupp.
all
If
right.
you ever
So
get
an
in an elevator and you
industrialist.
see German military industrialists, both of them.
So so let me just recap what I think I heard from you, which is that the only real chance we've got to maintain some sort of a both a democracy and a country that's still a country is the institutionalists and the capitalists sort of get together along with the grassroots and stand and do two things. One is do what they need to do to win the election, and two is do what they need to do to protect those results with the general strike.
That is not the only chance. That is the easiest scenario. There are other
Okay.
scenarios as well. But so the three teams, another way of describing the teams that is a little bit easier than all the gobbledygook that I was using before and all the fictional names is, what is your definition of America? The MAGA movement believes that America is a blood and soil nation. So is America a nation, or is America an idea, or is
Mm.
America a market? Right? The scenario where the nationalists and capitalists keep power after 2029, either by winning outright or by keeping power regardless. The label for that scenario in our game engine is the 1877 consolidation. It was named after the post Reconstruction era in the American South, where the Union just decided it was too hard to keep supporting Black people in the South and basically allowed de facto slavery to be reinstalled as Jim Crow for another
Right.
80.
Yeah.
So that's the situation where America as a nation wins and America as a market wins because people make a lot of money, but America as an idea goes away, right? You can have America as an idea without the market winning as well. You can have capitalists and nationalists both lose. And that's called the Peronist scenario after Juan Perón in Argentina. So that is sort of like what Bernie Sanders and some of the others in his coalition are saying is just rally people on class.
Mhm.
And that will be enough to defeat both the capitalists and the fascists. And that is a scenario that is possible in the game engine. It's awfully hard to do given the structure of America's society, but that's also a way where America as an idea can survive.
So the game at least believes that the idea of America can survive even if the capitalists who have the guns and money are not on the same side as the whatever you wanna call it, institutionalists, pro-American as
Yeah,
an idea.
yeah, the game rules believes is a little odd because it's math, but the game rules archetype three kinds of teams. America's idea, and America's idea is about democracy and the rule of law, consent of the
Right,
governed.
right,
Then America as marketplace, where capital can get great returns,
right,
right? And then there's America as a nation, the sort of stuff Stephen Miller obsesses about, and Steve Bannon.
which is ridiculous because
Um,
he wouldn't be a part of it. Anyway.
with you 100%. So, so all of those teams can win individually according to historical models.
Okay,
There are many and so all of so when I say that the game engine is programmed by historical models, uh, Peronism, the phenomenon in Argentina, where economic populism was used to reduce property rights, but within a framework of the consent of the governed and the peaceful transfer of power.
okay.
That is the overall label, but there are many examples of that happening where people together, the sort of communist, collectivist, anti capitalist instincts together, become powerful enough to ward off both fascism and capitalist wealth. That can happen.
Yeah,
It's
but
hard
then
to
do
get
you get
there.
another kind of, you know, Spanish situation where you've got, like, kind of a communist bloc and a fascist bloc fighting each other, and it doesn't and ea in either outcome, it's kind of not the democratic ideal.
Yeah, the game architecture is mostly focused on who wins by December 2030, but there's a narrative engine around it. The world in December 2030, where America has adopted the Argentinian populist Peronist model, is not a great world going forward for anybody. It's not awesome. Like the best scenario is where the capitalists and the institutionalists win. That's where the most prosperity, the most stability, the most rule of law. That's the best scenario. Um, for most people by most metrics. But in terms of winning, you can have an 1877 consolidation where the nationalists and the institutionalists win. You can have just the nationalists win over the ruined smoking range craters of an economy. That can happen too. But that
What do the
scenario in our situation is
capitalists
just
do in that situation, though? Because the economy
uh,
could
all of their shit is taken from them because they have no property rights.
okay. Yeah, okay, I get it. But if what if the nationalists and the capitalists are really the same?
So in the game, the thing about capital is there are some people in capital who are kind of nationalist aligned. So if you're on the capitalist team, you might get a card that says all your wealth comes from, national defense contracts and, fossil fuel extraction. And if you get that card, that means that if the nationalists win, your personal portfolio does a bit better. But you also have capitalists who believe in international trade and thrive in the creative industries. And, those people are not going to do well. Just by rules, the rule is there's a group of people who are intent on stealing a bunch of money from all the Americans using the cover of government. And those people may be rich capitalists, but that's not how they're defined in the game. They're defining the game as nationalists.
Okay.
So if you want to think of real world human beings, somebody like a Steve Jobs is a capitalist who benefits from the innovation economy. Somebody like a Jamie Dimon is a capitalist who's just a Davos capitalist, just trying to figure out how to keep making money and not get into politics. And someone like a Peter Thiel is a nationalist who wants to massively increase his wealth by steering America to a place where he gets to take more wealth from the rest of the country.
Right. So, do you think the rules of the game, which are taken from history, are actually the rules like, essentially, those rules will hold out? Or do you think something will break the entire paradigm and something different could happen?
I think it's the former. I think humans are entirely predictable at scale. I think that everybody who thinks about politics agrees there's going to be a reversion towards the mean. The question is, what is the mean? Most operatives, establishment Republican, Democrat alike, establishment capitalists, most operatives think that the mean is 1990 or 2010 or something. So they'll go back to a situation where the old rules held. And in that world, yeah, do your organizing, do your phone banking, do your lobbying, everything's basically the same. The game kernel, this game, the State of Exception Salon, is just designed to let people imagine what if the mean is earlier? What if humans mostly behave as they have over many centuries, not just as they did for a couple decades in the United States? And so the game assumes that the historical draw is gravity. And anyone who wants to play the game, we're building a version that remotely. And the leader of our game, this woman named Lucy Caldwell, who's one of my co-founders, she runs these salons, and people who are applying interested online, they're going to be setting up like places where teams can do some of this kind of remotely interactively over asynchronous moves.
Mhm.
So I encourage people to go to the Adult Society and look for that if they want. But also, just more generally, to answer your question, the whole point is that the vast, vast, vast majority of, I'll say it this way, this might hit a little bit better. If you listen to most political podcasts for the past 2 years, you will hear people profess on a daily basis how shocked they are at how fast things are moving or how bad things have gotten.
Well, that's
The
just because they
expression
lack
of
imagination.
surprise, precisely. Well, that's the point. That's the point of these salons, is to allow people to occupy a space where it's not surprising. And I will tell you, people who played in the salons in December of 2025 reacted to news events in January of 2026 with what I would describe as better historical awareness of what was happening.
Okay. So, so backing up, how did you get to so this sounds like the more people who understand all these sorts of permutations, the better people will respond between now and 2028, and theoretically be more strategic about how they build power, what their theories of change are, and the coalitions they create in order to get enough power to win and to protect that win from cheating.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Get enough power and use it appropriately. Use it in the
Right.
right way. But yes, that's exactly right.
So so there's an element where people, like, have to get out of their heads a little bit and, like, stop thinking that, like, this November is the end game. like the midterms or the end game, and see that as a point along the way toward gaining more significant power to be used to defend the rule of law, let's say.
Yes.
Okay, so
One of the
beyond
moves you can make if you're playing the fascist team, the nationalist team, and you want to win, one of the moves you can make in 2026 is try to make sure the Democrats win the House because they have no enforcement capacity. The subpoenas will be ignored and pardoned. Their budget rules will be ignored and pardoned. And all it is if you can get the right primary wins in safe Democratic seats, you can have a foil of someone who's so terrifying to Americans that when 2028 comes along, you win outright. So if you're a smart fascist player, you don't even contest the U.S. federal House in 2026. You just let the Dems take it.
so
It's a
what about
poison checklist.
smart institutionalists? How do
Well, there's a number of plays that have come in, uh, but it's all about broadening the coalition. So if you win the House by a large enough margin with a diverse enough coalition, and it actually the weird thing about law is it becomes true the more people believe it's true. And so if you've got a broad coalition that includes a lot of people with a big margin, well, it's actually harder for, kind of marginal players to resist subpoenas. If you get marginal, so one thing you can do is win the House in a way that it broadens the coalition. So, or win the Senate or whatever. So you're appealing to capitalists, you're appealing to people with Second Amendment interests, et cetera. A second thing that you can do is you can strengthen the capacity of the nation. There are many, and there are many parts of this that are happening right now in the legal infrastructure. People who like law professors, people that I went to law school with, 20, 30 years ago, whenever it was, who are now professors of law, who have previously had a more liberal orientation, are now embracing federalism and the Ninth Amendment and the 10th Amendment and the Second Amendment. And there's really good scholarship happening on the First Amendment. And that's important because the First Amendment is not just free speech, it's free assembly. And for a long time, free assembly was used by conservatives to attack the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If I can assemble freely, why can't I hang out with my racist friends? And so, because of that, liberal Democrats were basically on one side of all of these issues. And now that's entirely flipped. All of those issues, like freedom of assembly, means I don't need to have a platform that lets Nick Fuentes in. Second Amendment means I can have a gun just to make myself a harder target in case there's roving bands of thuggish federal masked agents, right? Who are
Mhm,
fundamentally bullies. The Fourth Amendment on search and seizure, the Ninth Amendment on retaining enumerated rights, the 10th Amendment on state power,
mhm.
and there's all kinds of stuff within that. Like there's a state national guard, which can be federalized right away, but there are also state defense forces, which cannot. The red states use them for immigration enforcement. The blue states tend to use them for like cyber crimes. Like there's many, many levers you can do to just build actual state power. And that includes, by the way, like, well, let's all join arms that if the lawfully elected winner is not seated in January 2029, I guess that means the federal government's in breach of the 16th Amendment. And for those of you who are not amendment nerds, that means, oh, I guess the income tax is no longer legal. And you don't make it a threat, you just make it a prediction. Like, look, if the federal government's in breach, there's no way they're going to be able to keep collecting taxes. Voluntary
It's
compliance is really important.
so one of the things that oh my god, 50 minutes have passed. Okay. So one of the things that we talk about out here in Substack advocacy land is that federalism or soft secession, or I don't actually like that term, but strong federalism. And I still can't figure out, because nobody really has given me a good answer, when the states can stop sending federal money to the feds. 'Cause the feds don't
So
actually
yeah,
need it, but the states do.
I'll give you I'll give you two answers. One, under current black letter federal law that has been solidified for decades, refined by the Supreme Court, the answer is never.
Right.
The most junior federal bureaucrat who's like hired right out of college has more power than a state constitution, the way current black letter federal law is understood. However, what if the federal government is in breach of all of its laws? How does the citizenry understand that?
How does the
So this is
social contract work?
precisely. So this is what Republicans and the MAGA people used to describe as constitutional hardball. where there's a little bit of, well, according to the legal technical rules, we can't do a darn thing. But let's now play street ball, where the only rules are the ones that can be enforced. That's where there's ambiguity. And the ambiguity, the fundamental answer, Stephanie, gets back to your earlier questions about like civil society. If enough of civil society is starting to say, well, we're not going to do it. So states now can start doing things like, hey, I run a big port. As a part of that, I owe the federal government a certain amount of money. For efficiency, I've always just paid that money. Going forward, I'm going to keep that money in escrow and use it in case the federal government doesn't deliver money that I'm owed by them for, say, Medicare.
Right.
It's
And
not
that
actually clear. Yeah.
so okay, so I've heard that argument before, and being in a blue state, I am all for this the blue states in particular using as much leverage as they can. How many people out there though, like real talk, this is where the kind of idea of do they have backbone and fight are really willing to play that game, that hardball?
Look, I think that political figures such as Gavin Newsom and JB Pritzker are passing about for ways to stand up, and they are not limiting themselves to things that will be safe. I think the problem is that there's just not enough generalized understanding of what will be effective. But I think that, I mean, look,
And do you
the
think
governor's
your
new
cynic Mhm.
I was going to say the crop of governors that are in power now across critical states, governors like Josh Shapiro, Abby Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill, these people are tough and sophisticated, and they're patriots. And
Are
uh,
they working together yet?
I don't know, not that I know of,
See,
but
this
I
is
wouldn't necessarily know.
right, I
I'm
know. I just thought
the
maybe you had an idea.
yeah. Well, look, the laws that I am describing and that you're observing being discussed on Substack, they're not imaginary. They're moving through committee. Some of them have been passed.
Right.
So pieces are coming into place. The question to my mind is whether it will come into place, whether the pieces for true civic resilience will come into place fast enough. But I would just remind you, as you're thinking about what is the kind of language that somebody like a Gavin Newsom should embrace, put aside your gag reflex for a minute and just remember what prominent political and media figures on the right said about the federal government under Clinton and Obama, right?
Right,
When Janet Reno, like there was a bunch of I mean, Waco, Texas, holy crap, mass atrocities, uh, child marriage, horrible. And it was defended by the worst people. That was a rallying cry for the right. And what language they use, the federal government is seen as illegitimate. My citizens understand their Second Amendment rights. I would not want to be a federal agent trying to enforce federal law in my state. Not a threat, a prediction. That's the kind of language that blue state governors need to start and blue state leaders need to start giving about what America looks like if, frankly, if MAGA keeps power after losing the election in 2028. And by the way, I would start using that language now about, like, say, now, today, if the rightful winner in 2028 is not seated in 2029, dot, dot, dot. I would not want to be a federal agent trying to collect taxes. I would not,
right.
that is the flashpoint.
That is a flashpoint. So, I know we only have a couple minutes left, and in the chat, there's some questions, one of which is, do any of these scenarios change with whatever we're gonna learn with the Epstein files?
So the Epstein files are live as of now. So there's references to them in the February briefs. One of the core engines, one of the core things about the gaming salon is that there is no such thing as truth on its own. There's just perceived truth and there's power.
That sounds
And
right.
so one of the moves that the fascists make, if they're smart, is they deliberately and selectively release misleading, suggestive evidence throwing blame at the institutionalists that they most want to smear, and then the average citizens just say, "Well, shit, there's a lot of smoke around those guys."
Mhm.
And it's a in under old rules, if the institutionalists continue to play, too nice, well, what happens is the public hears two things. The public hears the institutionalists saying, "Let's wait till the evidence gets out," and they hear the fascists saying, "Well, shoot, it's all the Democrats and their QAnon cabals." And in that world, if that's the path, Epstein does not help the institutionalists at all. Just part of another thing that the fascists used to win. So the existence of the Epstein files is really more of the Epstein files are one major battlefield where these different groups try to navigate and persuade and hold power.
Right. We're reaching the top of the hour. This has been so interesting and so fascinating. The fact that it's really all about power, and a lot of people out here uh, are motivated by what's right, and that's good, except it's not power particularly. And someone in the chat just said that Epstein, is a battlefield. They rape children. Yes, bad.
Well, I'll say about that, like 15% of the country roughly believes in QAnon. And you use the term rape children. So 15% of the country thought it was possible that Hillary Rodham Clinton was part of a child trafficking network that for satanic reasons raped and killed and ate children. So if 15% of the country can believe that, if you think that just the existence of Epstein is going to solve the problem, you're listening to a different soundtrack. Now, when I was working in politics, funding exploration and litigation around this was a huge priority because it's part of the corruption of the state. You do want to expose it, but exposing it's not enough if you're not aware. Like you've got to actually take power.
Has anything surprised you? I know that you used to work with Reid Hoffman a lot. Has anything surprised you about the way things are playing out?
No, it's exactly what I described. The Epstein obviously had a huge network. Reed was obviously lightly connected to it. As soon as the connection was revealed, he was super public. None of those other people are at all public. Reed was like, "Okay, here's exactly what I did. Please release all of the files right now." And they're
Mhm.
like, "No, no, no. We'll just continue to selectively pretend you're the villain so that we can cover this all." So it's not, I mean, it's exactly the sort of thing that you would expect for them to do.
Right, which is what they've been doing all along. You're starting to learn more. Let's go bomb Iran,
Or whatever, right.
whatever it is.
Yeah, if I had to bet, I would bet a lot of money that the current incumbent president is on film somewhere in those Epstein files,
I
but
don't even think
and I don't know
that I
anything
would
about that.
take. I mean, I think that it's pretty guaranteed, but
Yeah, it seems pretty likely to me as well, and I've thought that for many, many years, but if we never know, did it even happen? Who knows? The key thing is, will there be consent to the governed in the United States in 2030? That's what these salons are trying to ask, and the odds are not great. It's still possible, but the odds are not great.
on that happy note, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanna say before I let you go?
No, people, just as much as possible, focus on the plan to take power in January of 2029. That means win in 28, and that means make sure the win sticks in 29. Just keep both of those in your heads.
Well, thank you so much for I don't know what oh my gosh, we went way over. I'm really sorry. I was just looking at the how long we've been live. Thank you very much. Everybody, thank you for coming, and, please subscribe. Is there anywhere you want people to subscribe to you, Dmitri?
Oh, they don't have to subscribe to me. If you're interested in the political analysis, You can go to Voices of the Atoll, which is a Substack post, and Karthik Subasri is the construct that does the political analysis for the atoll. And then if you're interested in learning more, you can just go to the atollsociety.org. It's atollsociety.org.
All right, sounds great. And everyone, uh, yeah, also subscribe to me, paid or free, and I'll see you all later. Thank you for listening to Freedom Over Fascism. You can find us online at www.freedomoverfascism.us. Please become a subscriber, and if you have the means, please support us with a paid subscription.